Welcome to the Sober Life Rocks podcast. I'm your host, Margy Schaller, and I want to welcome you today and let you know that you are not alone. How many of you have been in those situations where the alcohol forward events at conferences or business parties just made you feel isolated? I know I have, but through this podcast, we are changing that narrative. We are here to create a community where individuals like you who choose not to drink or drink less for whatever reason can find camaraderie, support, and practical advice. So let's get the conversation started. So, guys, this is the craziest interview we are about to do because I am going to introduce you to Katrina Sanders. Now, Katrina is an international speaker. She's a podcaster. She's an author. She is a writer, an educator, like all these things. She's a philanthropist and a thought leader. I could go on and on and on. But she's also known as the dental WINEgenist. As a level 1 sommelier, she's transformed the way that dental professionals experience continuing dental education. Katrina, I have a sommelier on Sober Life Rocks podcast. What?
It makes no sense. I don't know what we're thinking, but I think this actually is what creates a more provocative and exciting storyboard, doesn't it, Margie? And that's what this is about. The fact that there's such a spectrum of how we can support sobriety and what that looks like. And so I'm honored to be on kind of the other side of that spectrum, I suppose, in hosting this narrative about how important it is whether you are fully sober, partially sober, somewhere in between, that there are all opportunities for us to create better awareness and a support system. So
And
that's what we're here to do today.
this is why I'm so excited because this is exactly what, Sober Life Rocks isn't about like people who are recovering from alcoholism, right? That is
Right.
a sliver.
Sure.
But there are people who don't drink for health reasons. There are people who just don't drink that often, or people who, when they go to these professional events, they're just like, that is not the time for me to be drinking. I need to be on my A game.
Yeah.
And then those who do drink, but maybe just a drink or a drink or two, like it's all good.
Yeah.
But the point is that we can celebrate and uplift each other's choices. So, gosh, I'm so excited to have you. So, Katrina, I know a little bit about you because you're just a rockin' amazing woman, but I don't know much about where did you come from? Can you start? I mean, I always like to ask people, like, tell me a little bit about your origin story. Like, what was growing up like for you, and what was the narrative around alcohol? Like, what did you see and experience?
Oh my gosh. What an amazing question to start this with. So I grew up in Milwaukee. So as you can imagine, there's a very interesting drinking culture in a city like Milwaukee. I grew up in the 80s. I was a kid of the 80s where it was super normal to be at a picnic with dad and grandpa and my uncles, and they're drinking beers, no problem, I mean, just cracking open beers on a Saturday afternoon while listening to the Milwaukee Brewers play.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and I grew up in a home with, my grandmother who loved a fabulous martini cocktail. I grew up with my mom having that box of Franzia in the kitchen, in the refrigerator for whenever she needed it to take the edge off. And I will say, growing up, it wasn't taboo. It was just kind of put out there in front of us. And so I will say, and this, you're going to really think I'm a nerd. I didn't drink in high school like a lot of people do. I didn't. I was like the band geek and the theater nerd. And so I really like, I wasn't exposed to a lot of drinking in high school. That wasn't really the environment I was in. And so it really wasn't until, of course, you go off to college and you're exposed to the socialization, I would say, of what college is, that you start to get introduced to drinking. And from there you begin to learn a lot about yourself and what you can and can't handle with regards to alcohol. But I will say, growing up, it wasn't I did not grow up in a home with alcoholism. I didn't observe alcohol abuse of any kind. It was just a comfortable social lubricant that was used, and my family did not hold back from. I mean, I remember my first sip of beer when I was like 6 years old, just because my dad thought it was funny to see, how I would react to the flavor of beer, which I did not like at 6 years old.
Yeah.
So, it was a very Mayberry experience, I will say, with alcohol. And then again, you step into the world of college, and my goodness, that gives you a different exposure to it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So everybody has a different story and a different relationship with it, but we all at one point or another hit a place where we're like, oof, that might be a bridge too far. Like, did you
Yeah.
have those moments?
Yes. Yeah. And I will say it, gosh, you're just getting it out of me, Margie. Um, yes. I will say, for me, it really hit early on in my speaking career
Mm.
when there was there is an expectation at a lot of these conferences, exhibit halls, corporate dinners, to consume and to become more and more social and create stronger connections with everybody else who's drinking at these events. And I've certainly, I could name the city and the hotel bar where it's like I should not have had as much as I did,
Mm.
and went back to my hotel room and felt like garbage the next day, and couldn't fully show up as the version of myself that I wanted to. And so this perception of me needing to consume to show up as a specific version the night before, and then what I really wanted to portray about myself as a professional woman, a professional clinician who wanted to be taken seriously, was in fact impacted as a result.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, so walk me back to the origin of the dental wine gist. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Who are you in that regards? And tell me what that's about.
Yeah. The dental WINEgenist started from my dental speaking career, or rather the desire to get into dental speaking. So, it is a difficult industry to get into. And my goodness, you've got to work and you've got to identify yourself as a brand and a name and all of these things. And I was struggling early on. I was amongst a list of many hygienists who honestly and sadly were seen as people who just wanted to get out of the op and do something different, which I love clinical dentistry so much, and I don't ever want to get out of the op. But it was a hard time. And so
And
I
let's just be frank. I mean, you're young and you're blonde. So, like, those are two strikes against you, right?
That's right. And being a woman as well, which is was
Right.
podcast for another day. But it was hard. It was really hard. And I wanted to be able to stand out, and I wanted to be different, and I wanted to be seen for authentically who I am. I saw an opportunity to create continuing dental education experiences. And I thought it's not necessary that CE be boring and something you have to go to, but rather something that you should be able to look forward to. I wanted to create events that I myself wanted to attend. So I started creating these CE courses, and I was a VIP member down at a local wine bar here in Scottsdale, where they basically let me use the back room for free. All I had to do was buy a case of wine. That's it.
Mhm.
So I was like, this is a great deal. I got some little rinky dinky projector off of Amazon, used a back of one of their signs actually as like my screen, and projected these little rinky dinky programs that I put together. I'm truly using the word rinky dinky very loosely because I actually still present both of those decks to this day, which is so funny. But I was presenting these programs, and because I had all of this wine, I thought, well, I should serve these at my event. I'm here in the wine bar, I totally can. And I was studying for my level one sommelier exam at the time. So I thought this will be a really cool way for me to study how a som hosts a wine tasting, how we walk through the 5 S's of wine tasting, what a Chardonnay profile should tastes like versus a Sauvignon Blanc profile. And so I really started to create this unique experience around CE. Hygienists, doctors wanted to be a part of this just because it was different. I would host the wine tasting and pepper in my content throughout. And I will say it was unique and it was different enough that I really attained a lot of attention, positive and negative. I
I
had
was
a
going to say, I
lot.
mean, here you just got done saying like it was the moment that you realized that the drinking in excess
Mhm.
was not going to be in alignment with who you wanted to show up as.
Yeah.
And now you're saying that drinking was part of who you wanted to show up as.
Yeah. Yeah. The dichotomy, isn't it? Nice and confusing. Now, here's what I'll say about that though, Margie. Um, this is where I hate to over abuse the word moderation, but this is where moderation really comes into play. Um, Unfortunately, when your brand is tethered to something like drinking,
Mm.
there is a perception that automatically associates with that. And that was the negativity that I was having to work through. It was things like, well, she must be irresponsible if she's serving wine at her events. She must be a party girl if she's serving alcohol. She must not care about clinical excellence research or her content if she's choosing to focus on alcohol. And so I had to work through a lot of stigmas associated with my brand.
Mm.
On the other side, I certainly had started to build a tribe of people who came to my events and learned very early on that these weren't events where we were binge drinking. My goodness, when you're doing a wine tasting, you're drinking 1 to 3 ounces every 20 minutes. I mean, you're having at the most a
Yeah.
glass and a half over a
Yeah.
three. I mean, you are not binge drinking. And this was elevated content. We're talking about tasting profiles, and I'm pairing it with cheeses and chocolates and all of these things. So it was fun and interactive, but it certainly did come with its negative stigmas, stereotypes. And I will say, I think there's an opportunity for us to redefine what that looks like.
For sure. I mean, all I can say is from my experience. So when I was in my young 20s, I was newly married. My husband's best friend was a fine wine sales representative.
Okay, that's a good person to know.
Well, yeah. And so he would bring over 6 bottles and do the brown wrap around them.
Hmm.
I was learning to love to cook back then. And so he would tell me what things to cook, and we would literally go through and do the tasting. The challenge is that with those 6 bottles of wine and the three of us, we also learned that once you open a bottle of wine, like it's not going to retain all of its splendor for
That's
very long.
right.
So we would drink all of it.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
when I hear wine tasting, to me, that was my experience.
Yeah.
And sure, I could judge that.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think what I hear you saying, and as a speaker coach myself, I always tell people to craft a curated experience with your content
Yeah.
or with your stories. And what
Yeah.
you're saying is you took it to the next level to craft that curated experience with all of the senses and to
Yes.
really understand excellence is a state of mind and not just a thing we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what really thank you for saying that. What really solidified it for me was how you could play with the nuances of something that seemed like it didn't make sense or fit into dentistry and play with that in a way. I started to develop content about branding. And I used the 5 S's of wine tasting to talk about how your brand is seen or metabolized within your target audience or your avatar. So, how it's seen, how people savor it, what little sips of your brain, and so we started to create it and play around with all of this really fun, cool content, which just was very unique and different. And I will say there's magic inside of that. There's a lot of excitement that can come from taking something like that and reimagining it or trying to change the narrative around that. I will also share that this is not a new concept. Many dental study clubs will open up a house white and a house red and, let people experience it. This wasn't a new concept. It was, I think, more so the fact that what I was doing just felt and seemed so different because we were going at something that was guided. And along the way, I also was infusing who I am, not just as a sommelier, but as a person. When you come to my programs, I share pictures of my dogs, and you'll learn about how I grew up in small town Greendale, Wisconsin. You'll see pictures of my dad, and you'll see the, picture of the very first, 1989 Plymouth Voyager brown van that I drove when I was a kid. And, I tell funny stories, and I wanted to create this experience. Again, wine was a vehicle for, but it wasn't the essence of. It just enhanced the experience. What I really wanted to do was to create something that was authentic, because I started to attract people who were in my tribe who liked metabolizing dental content that wasn't sterile,
Mhm.
that liked learning this information in a different way. We weren't in hotel conference centers. We were in wine bars, and very slowly that started to accelerate into doing wine tours. So we would take a tour bus of hygienists from Phoenix up to wine country. In northern Arizona, we'd stay overnight. We would do wine tastings, and we did CE like on the bus on the way up and back down. And I will tell you something that was so amazing about that, Margy. At the beginning, everyone's sitting there. Nobody knows each other except maybe the one friend that you've convinced to come with you. And they're all sitting there 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. Okay, we're going to do this 2 hour CE. Katrina Sanders is going to talk to us about whatever for 2 hours on the way up to Cottonwood, Arizona. And by the end of the trip, the way back down Sunday morning, after we had done CE all day and woke up and did yoga in the morning and got to connect, you saw seasoned hygienists sitting with new grads. New friendships had been made. That
Mhm.
really, this wasn't about the wine. It was just about bringing people together and sitting them down at a table. And I will tell you, the coolest thing about that first trip we had 3 pregnant women on the bus, so they couldn't even drink, and they just wanted to be a part of it. And of course, we found, a couple of alcohol-free wines that they could experience and be a part of it. It was an open community that pick up a seat to the table. Anybody's invited, come be a part of it. And so it really created a lot of inclusiveness.
Mhm.
It created a community, a network, whether you were drinking or not. It was just about, hey, we want to be able to experience this in a different way.
I really like that because, I'm sitting here listening, I'm thinking to myself, um, there is another program that often hosts itself at a winery, and I don't go. Not because
Mhm.
I'm afraid I'm going to not drink or something, because that's long ago, but it just it feels like, why would I spend my time at a winery?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it feels like it's not the right place for me to be.
Hmm.
So I do think that there is a sensitivity there that, like, good for these pregnant women because they had chosen to stop drinking during their pregnancy. But my guess is that ordinarily that would be a place to be very comfortable.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I think people who, especially like you, have grown up in a very normal um, upbringing where alcohol was not a really big issue, like it was something that you were just able to identify and handle early on, it doesn't make sense to somebody like you why for me that feels a little like,
Yeah.
so then you called me and said, Margy, I need to be on this podcast because, and so now I want to let you tell that story.
Yeah. Let's go there. So being seen as the WINEgenist, there is an expectation that anytime that you see me out somewhere, that you're going to see me with a glass of wine in my hand. And I ran into a challenge where I was in my first trimester of pregnancy. I'm considered advanced age or geriatric pregnancy, which really means that you're a bit more gun shy about sharing in your first trimester that you're pregnant. There's certain hurdles you and your spouse need to comfortably get over before you're ready to make that public.
Mhm.
And so I happen to be in massive dental convention season, present at those events where there are lots of networking experiences and opportunities. And I'm walking into bars, places where I am comfortable. However, now I have to be a little bit concealed about what it is I'm ordering. As a sommelier and as the WINEgenist, a lot of people would ask, well, whatever wine you're ordering, I'm going to order that too. And gosh, that's I'm so honored. You trust my opinion about wine, but what you don't know is that I'm drinking ginger ale, trying to convince all of you that it's prosecco, so that you all don't ask if I'm pregnant, because I'm just not ready to have that really personal conversation. And I'll tell you, Margie, that was truly the first time that I, as somebody whose brand is built with wine as a component of it, had truly felt empathy for what it must feel like for someone who is making or has made the active choice to step onto the spectrum of sobriety, whatever that may be. This was my first time truly experiencing what that empathy was, what that felt like.
And what did it feel like for you?
It, it was it was socially uncomfortable. Um, I felt like there were expectations of how I should be aligning with everyone else in the room, that I should be meeting that energy, which also, when you're in your first trimester, you have no interest in doing. You're exhausted. That I needed to meet that energy, um, that there would be questions if I chose the non-alcoholic drink option. Um, that I needed to have a response ready in the event that I chose something that was non-alcoholic.
Mhm.
Um, and and that didn't really feel amazing because it felt like I had a choice, but I also was pressured to then have to explain my choice.
Yeah.
And that was very eye-opening for me
Yeah.
to be there. And um because it just feels, at least to me, it felt like you couldn't just say, I'm not going to drink tonight. That
Right.
that that I don't know why. I don't know if that was just a me thing. I felt that, or whatever it was, that may not be enough. You know what I'm saying?
I
Meanwhile,
know
gosh,
exactly what
the
you're saying.
provocative question is like, what if I turned that around and was like, oh, interesting that you chose to order your third glass of wine. You know what I'm saying? Like so I don't know. It was just, oh, I was just in this weird space that I really hadn't been in before. And I had to think about it, Margie. Like, have I been in scenarios before where I wasn't pregnant, I wasn't on, antibiotics or all the things that would like be excusable
Right.
for not drinking? Like, have I ever at any other time been there with colleagues, friends, people, and just been like, no, I think I'm good. I think I'm good. And how did I handle that? And what did I say? And I mean, it just, there's another layer of uncomfortability when you don't feel 100% confident about what that response is going to be, or that response is going to be respected in the way that it was intended.
Ugh. I am just sitting here being washed over with just this relief and gratitude to hear that I'm not crazy.
No,
Because I
you're
think
not.
one of the things for me being in recovery is that, 19 years ago when I got sober, there was stigma
Yeah.
around people who had to get sober,
Yeah.
like me. And so I hid it with good reason.
Hmm.
And over the years, I've sort of watched other people be more open about it and thought to myself, ooh, how do you do that?
Hmm.
And so, just now, being completely open about it in my professional life, um, the response I've gotten from everybody across the board has been like, good for you.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
amazing. But there's still that moment. when it's the gathering around the bar before we go out to dinner or something, and everybody's ordering their whatever things, that I still get that little hitch of just like, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
one soda,
Right.
right? And it
Right.
feels lame. It feels like I'm not quite there with everybody. Now,
Yeah.
nobody today looks at me and says, what?
Right.
Have something like I am not getting that because I'm open about it.
Yeah.
But before I did, before I was open about it, people would be like, oh, come on, live a little.
Yeah. You know,
I am
it's
living.
I'm living and I'm going to wake up tomorrow and feel great and hydrated
Yeah,
because I am
yeah,
living.
yeah.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this before. We're in an interesting coming of age, I think. One of my favorite things that you do, there's so many of my favorite things that you do, but one of my favorite things that you do is when you deep dive into the generational talk. And I love what you're deep diving into around a lot of this content because I think it's really changing a lot of the narrative about where we were, where we are, where we're going. And I'm feeling like we're in this shift, this transitional space now, where I will say I'm a millennial, albeit I'm the oldest of the millennials. I was born in 85. So what we started about 83, I think.
Mhm.
Um, and
They're
although
cusper.
that's right. I'm a cusp. I'm on the cusp.
Yeah.
Um, I have a little bit of that latchkey, mentality, just how my parents raised me. I did not have helicopter parents. Um, it's interesting. I'm seeing a decent enough portion of us millennials, just uh, you know, choosing not to, um, just
For
because
health
we just don't
reasons.
want to. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just I no, I'm good. I don't need that. I don't want that. Nope, I'm good. Um, what I would like to see more of is that being a bit louder or more punctuated. You know what I'm saying? Like there are some, I've got several of my friends that, well, for one reason or another, like don't drink or, I mean, I've got a lot of my friends who are super active and, kind of bodybuilder-esque where they just don't want to because they don't want to. Um, Gosh, I'd love to see that a bit more streamlined so that we can have that spectrum of people at a social event in dentistry and you can walk into a social networking situation at Chicago Midwinter or Greater New York or Hinman. You can walk in and go, "Oh, you know what? I'm gonna have a virgin mojito tonight. Like I want the mojito. I just don't want the alcohol." And say it with confidence and be like, "I'm good." And not have this like, "Are you not drinking? Is everything okay? What's wrong with you? Did you not want to?" Oh, you know what I'm saying? Like we don't need that. That's such a strange thing. I will say I have celiac disease. So I used to get that when I would order food. I'd have to ask for the gluten-free menu, and everybody at the table's looking at me like I'm the freak at the table. And they, oh, you've chosen to eat gluten-free, and it's like, I haven't chosen. I have celiac disease. So thank you. But it has helped me a little bit. I'd love to get to the space where we can normalize that in a way where none of us feel like we're freaks at the bar. We're just here to have a good time and here to connect. And if we choose to have an adult beverage, we do. And if we don't, it doesn't mean that we should feel uncomfortable being in that social situation because these are all networking events.
That's right.
Networking. We should be connecting. It should be inclusive of
That's right.
all. That's what networking means, right? So I'd love to get to a space where you don't have to say, yeah, I'm not drinking, and then feel responsible for filling in the rest of that sentence with a reason and hoping fingers and toes are crossed that the person listening to you is going to accept that answer. I think we should change that narrative and just say, I've just decided not to drink tonight.
Yep.
And
All
let
good.
that be an acceptable response.
And
Um,
that we can still be one of the cool kids with that,
100%.
like
100%.
a good old
Yes.
boy, belling up to the bar for your shots or whatever it is. Like it, that's cool that you do that and go for it. But I don't need to feel separate because I don't.
Right. That's
Now,
right.
here's what I want to ask you. You don't know this is coming, but
Right.
we talk about our sober wingmen and
Yeah.
another term, an ally. So now that you have been on this journey, now that you have experienced it from the other side for a little bit of a glimpse of what that's like, what would you say your lessons are on how you can be an ally and a sober wingman for people differently in a
Yeah.
more proactive way?
I love that question. I love that question. Um, as a sommelier, I think the first step is I think you're doing such a beautiful job of creating awareness where we're starting to see alcohol-free options at some of these bars.
Mm.
So I would say a really cool place to start would be, oh my gosh, you had the, alcohol-free papaya mixer. Do you like it? Do you mind if I grab a sip of that? I'd love to try it so that your sober friends feel like they're just as much a part of what's going
Mhm.
on because people who order cocktails, it's like, oh, you got the margarita. Can I try a little bit so that how can you create that same narrative for your sober, colleagues or friends who might be with you? I think that's step number one. I think that involves a lot of inclusivity in and of itself.
Yeah.
I think step two is um, normalizing not needing to even make a spectacle about them not having an alcohol beverage. So, oh, you didn't see that there was wine? They have wine. Did you want to try a whiter? Right? I mean, we don't need to make a spectacle about it. And as an ally, it's oh my gosh, again, that's so awesome. Do you mind if I try a sip of yours? I actually really want to try that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, not and being supportive when there are scenarios where there is a question. You know what I'm saying? Oh, Margy, they have wine here. You've decided not to have wine. Gosh, an ally could say, you know what, Margy, what you're having actually looks really good. I'm gonna get that next. You know what I'm saying? So that
I
it doesn't
love that.
even need to be about why this or why that. Um, I
I
think
love
that's
that.
huge. I think that's huge. And I do think it also, I mean, let's think about it this way. This is a really great way for us, those of us who are on that spectrum of we do drink, but we've also learned, there's a certain limit that we should not
Mhm.
exceed so that we can perform the next day or do the things that we need to do. Be inspired by your sober friends
Yeah.
because I know I do when I'm around more sober people. I don't, first of all, I don't take shots at all. That was, I was like, that was like rule number one at my bachelorette party. I was like, I will not be taking a shot, not a single one. But I don't feel pressured when I'm around my sober friends. So when I'm out at a bar and by the way, I personally have never felt like my sober friends look at me like, oh, she's ordering a glass of wine. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe they wouldn't be my friends or whatever. I don't know. My sober friends don't judge me on that. So I
No.
don't judge them. There's just, it's mutual love back and forth. But I think it's a great opportunity to kind of leverage and be inspired by your sober friends and go, you know what? Yeah, I've had my glass of wine. I'm good.
Mhm.
I'm going to do ginger ale the rest of the night, and let them inspire you to show up as the version of yourself that you want. We started this podcast by talking about the fact that sometimes when you over imbibe and either, I mean, there's a whole host of complications that can arise. You're drinking in front of colleagues, um, coworkers, potential clients, potential meeting planners. And the more you consume, the less control you have. How do you show up that evening? How do you feel the next day? Once I hit my 30s, that question of how do you feel the next day is a very different answer.
Just
And
wait.
right, yikes. But the idea being, am I showing up the way I want to show up as?
Yeah.
Do I do I want to be the sloppy person at the bar that
Yeah.
people are going, oh my goodness, yeah, I saw Katrina Sanders at the bar. Oh my
What
goodness,
a mess. Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
do you is that really how I want to show up? when I'm at these, you know, work environment events.
Hmm.
And the next day when I wake up and I'm sweating it out and I feel like garbage, like is that what you want? Is that your intention when you go to these events? They are really great for connecting with friendships, but does that mean to you that you need to over imbibe? My sober friends remind me and are so inclusive about we're having a fabulous time.
Hmm.
I was hanging out with a bunch of them. We all went and got pizzas at Chicago Midwinter. So we're just, it's 11 o'clock at night and I'm drinking a root beer. Like, oh my gosh, this is the best. And we're eating these amazing, gorgeous deep dish pizzas. Like, you can have sober fun and you experience the city and the culture and all the things. It doesn't always have to be tethered to alcohol. And so, I mean, lean on your sober friends to
Yes.
let you see the other side of these really cool things, these really cool moments that they capture when they're there at those events.
Yes.
Um, because that's what makes it an experience. It's not always the alcohol. And I can say that as the dental wine hygienist, it's not always the alcohol that creates the experience.
Oh, mic drop. Okay, so last thing I wanted to share with you, because we haven't talked since then, we just got back from the California Dental Association meeting. They reached out to us because they were going to be having a wine tasting on on the exhibit floor, and they said, "Ah, we realized like we're not being fully inclusive. How can we do better? Are there good non-alcoholic wines?" And I said, "Yes, we'll figure that out." So what I know is that many non-alcoholic wines are not good,
Hmm.
not good at all.
Hmm.
And so I was sort of in a panic and reaching back to those days when wine was my everything. I started doing my research and I found a wine out of New Zealand that was winning Wine Spectator Awards head to head against alcohol wines.
Hmm.
And it's called Giesen, Giesen. I get nothing for saying that, but I got some samples. They were amazing. So
Wow.
we brought them in. And Katrina, there were people who were coming by, and it was so funny because sometimes we would just be flat out like, oh, this is alcohol-free wine. And people were like, oh, no, thanks. Okay. So other
Okay.
times we didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And the distributor was there with me. And so we would say nothing. They would say, which kind would you like? And they'd try it. And they're like, oh, this is pretty good. And we're
Yeah.
like, yeah. And it's like notes of this, notes of that. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah.
alcohol free. They go, what?
Uh-huh.
And then you saw the gears start to turn and they would go, yeah, it's almost like wine. And we're like, no,
Yeah.
just a second ago, you were saying.
Uh-huh.
So it was really fun to play with that.
Oh,
And
that's amazing.
it was so interesting to seeing people's reactions
Yeah.
to it was almost like they touched something hot when they learned that it was alcohol free.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
kind of weird reaction is that?
Well, what's so funny? First of all, I want to just do a shout out to CDA for adapting to and creating, and collaborating all those things. Like that's amazing. And again, you spend a lot of time talking about generations and some of the changes or pivots that we're seeing in some of these dental meetings. I think that is so progressive, and we will only continue to see more and more of that, which is really exciting. So kudos to CDA and their leadership team for acknowledging and adapting to that. Here's what I'll say about this. This actually cracks me up. I'd mentioned earlier that I have celiac disease. So whenever I, order desserts or whatever, you order the flourless version of that dessert. And I will tell you, like flourless chocolate cake is very dense and just beautiful. And yes, you usually get very like decadent fudge over the top of it and gorgeous, berries and all of
Very.
that. I mean, it is really like incredible. Gluten-free pastries or baking can actually be very delicious, very scrumptious. And oftentimes when you compare it with the glutinous version, however you want to say it, the glutinous version, it just doesn't, the gluten-free version outperforms every time. And so it is interesting. There is a perception around gluten-free consumption. And I remember I was back home, Dale's from Cleveland, my husband's from Cleveland. we happened to be back home, and Dale's mom had gotten us some gluten-free pizzas, and she made them. She was at Costco. She tried them. Oh, they were delicious. And then the lady said, "Yeah, and they're gluten-free." And Mama Sharon was like, "I can't believe this." So she bought these, gluten-free pizzas. She brought them home and she cooked them, and she goes, "Don't tell anybody that they're gluten-free because nobody will eat them otherwise." And of course, everybody ate the pizzas and they were like, "Wow, Sharon, this is delicious. Where'd you get this pizza?" "Oh, at Costco," and all this stuff. So it's interesting, the stigma or the perception around it. And I don't know really where that comes from, but it's of course hysterical to see that people have decided that, oh, it's almost like wine. Like, it's not wine if it doesn't have alcohol in it.
Right.
That's the deciding factor, when the reality is it's wine if it's gone through the fermentation process and been sourced from grapes, but it can also be sourced from plums and all these other things. So there's a spectrum of what is even considered wine. New
Yeah.
Zealand is one of my favorite terroirs to drink from. And I love that you found non-alcoholic. Now, non-alcoholic wines can be curated a whole host of ways, depending on what the fermentation process looks like, or they can have the alcohol removed.
Yes.
So it really just kind of depends on what that process looks like. It is still wine. It's still gone through. It just has a slightly different fermentation process to it, or it has different levels of yeast added and things like that. But it certainly is wine, and it certainly, boasts the same profiles. It's the same concept that we see with wine that is, sulfite free or organic wines. I mean, we're seeing a whole spectrum of different kinds of wines, and it certainly makes sense that our friends in California are experimenting with, now taking alcohol-free wines into their meetings. But I will say, I think that just shows the lack of appreciation of where we are in the wine space when somebody says that. It's the same thing as people going, "Oh, I would never eat this gluten-free dessert." And it's like, that's fine, more
Yes,
for me.
it
You don't know what you're missing because this is actually way better, you
is.
know. So and again, if it's gone through Wine Spectator and it's got the points on it, I mean, it's been evaluated by certified sommeliers, at least at a level 2, who have evaluated for expertise, all of the profiles of the wine. So it's interesting that I'm going to assume a relatively novice wine taster walking around the exhibit hall floor at
Yeah.
CDA would go, "Oh, it's not really wine." That just, to me, just seems very silly, and quite honestly gives a negative connotation to wine tasters, that we're very highbrow and, oh,
Yeah.
wine tasting has to be so uppity, and it doesn't at all. Wine tasting, we're all farmers. That's what winemakers are. They're farmers who just love what they do and love a fabulous representation and expression of their terroir. So that's what the wine does, whether it has alcohol in it or not.
Perfect. Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. I
I've
just
been having a blast.
I absolutely love the fact that we have danced between the aisles of what alcohol can do in moderation and how it brings people together, but on the other hand, how celebrating everybody's choices
Yes,
and lifting each other up with whatever those choices are yields the same results.
that's right.
It yields the
That's
same
right.
results. Is there anything else before we wrap up that you would like to share?
I thank you, Margie, for hosting this conversation, and thank you for conceptualizing sober life rocks. Um, I think the one piece that I would say that I hope people are starting to kind of surmise from the work that you're doing is that there is a spectrum. You can be an ally or a wingman. That this concept of talking about sobriety and what sobriety looks like is actually about inclusivity. It's
Mhm.
about saying we all belong here, no matter what's in our cup, and we all have something significant to say. It's not about casting judgment. It's not about pointing fingers. It's not about eye rolls or eyebrow raises. that it's about creating a safe space where people can safely network and whatever that looks like, that people can be amongst colleagues and friends without feeling like they have to create a storyline around this. And ultimately, it's about finding ways for us to move forward in the direction of where generation by generation we're going, where dental conferences are going, where we will continue to see the need for more inclusivity as people feel less and less tethered to a perception of how we should be behaving, but rather feeling that authenticity and that comfortability to say, nope, I'm just not drinking tonight. And so I hope, the audience of people listening to this can hear that and know that this is not from a space of judgment or exclusivity, but rather from a space of inclusivity and love and support.
I just love that so much. And I've loved having this time with you.
Me too.
I will say that whatever your choices are, we celebrate you. However, nobody has ever regretted not drinking the next morning. Until next time, thank you for listening.